But I want to point out that even though there's sort of
so.
I was going to say that's something that hits a lot of Americans home.
And Walmart and other stores are letting their consumers, their shoppers, know that prices are on the rise, and it's specifically because of President Trump and his trade policies. The goods coming in from China are tariffed at an average rate of 51%. You will be paying $3,200 more for everything that you buy this year. And that's going to make what we're expecting in terms of recessionary outlook, reduced or raised unemployment, and overall inflation continue for the remainder of this year.
Each American family is losing an extra $3,200 a year due to price increases from a 51% import tariff on Chinese goods and the threat of a 50% EU tariff. Are you ready? Soaring living costs. Can you imagine when the price of a bag of coffee, a can of beer, or a box of painkillers suddenly rises by a few dollars? It may seem small, but over time it adds up to a significant amount for every family each year. The main cause is import tariffs that increase costs from production to shipping, forcing manufacturers and retailers to raise prices to cover expenses. This creates a vicious cycle. As prices go up, consumers have to spend more, while incomes do not rise accordingly. The result is reduced purchasing power, putting pressure on the entire economy. It's clear to see that even the smallest everyday items make your wallet tear unexpectedly. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. Moreover, this price increase impacts people unevenly. Low and middle-income individuals suffer more because they spend most of their income on these essential goods. As living costs rise, they have to cut back on other expenses or borrow more, worsening their financial situation. This also reduces the ability of millions of American families to save and invest for the future. Import tariffs reach record highs. Goods from China are now subject to an average tariff of 51%, an unprecedented level. This nearly cuts off the flow of cheap imports into the U.S., causing supply shortages and driving prices up. That's not all. There is also the looming threat of a 50% tariff on all imports from the European Union, including key products like medicines, cars, and airplanes. Can you imagine the serious disruption this causes to supply chains? Factories, ports, and retailers are all thrown into chaos, struggling to maintain stock levels for the U.S. market. This continuous price rise hits directly into the pockets of every consumer. Financial markets in turmoil. It's not just consumers feeling the pressure. The U.S. financial markets are also entering a state of instability. Investor confidence has sharply declined as unclear tariff policies create significant uncertainty. The stock market is experiencing unusual volatility, causing anxiety among investors. At the same time, the bond market is reacting to a new spending plan nearing $3.8 trillion without any accompanying tax cuts. The growing budget deficit is making investors cautious, leading to financial market turbulence. This impact extends beyond the wealthy, spreading across all layers of society. Social welfare cuts amid inflation. Amid rising prices, social welfare programs like Medicaid and food stamps are facing budget cuts. This comes at the hardest time for low-income individuals and families already struggling with increasing living costs. These cuts add financial pressure, making it harder for them to access necessary health care and food. As inflation shows no sign of easing, such decisions will deepen the wealth gap and create significant social burdens. Clear risk of recession. Economic experts are repeatedly warning that the risk of a recession is becoming increasingly evident. Unemployment rates may rise, inflation may not ease, and upcoming tariffs affecting over 100 countries will continue to harm American consumers and weaken the domestic market. This could lead to a deep economic crisis impacting millions of lives. Are you ready for the major changes ahead? Can the economy withstand these successive shocks? April 2025 marked a critical turning point for the U.S. economy. Over 2,200 American businesses declared bankruptcy, a staggering number that signals deep unrest. At the same time, the average tariff rate soared to nearly 28%, the highest it's been in over 100 years. The reaction was immediate and sharp when the U.S. announced new tariffs targeting over 150 countries. The S&P 500 index plunged, losing more than $5 trillion in just the first few days of April. This plunge ranks as one of the most severe in recent history. Why does this matter? Because it reflects a crisis of confidence among investors, the very engines fueling the American economy. When investor trust evaporates, capital dries up. Companies struggle to raise funds for expansion or day-to-day operations. The result? Economic disruption ripples from Wall Street down to Main Street. Small businesses and individual investors, already vulnerable, face heavy losses. The domino effect triggered by tariff policies shakes the financial sector to its foundation. The stock market isn't the only victim. American businesses are under immense pressure from soaring import tariffs. Retail giants like Walmart have publicly warned about the impossibility of keeping prices low as operational costs skyrocket. While the government expects businesses to absorb these burdens, the reality paints a different picture. Small and medium enterprises, already struggling, face crushing increases in raw materials, shipping, and production costs. Supply chains are severely disrupted. International suppliers hit by tariffs delay shipments and hike transportation fees. To stay afloat, many companies slash production or cut jobs, weakening their competitive edge both at home and abroad. Though tariffs are levied on imported goods, the real losers are American consumers. Studies reveal that up to 92% of tariff costs are passed on to buyers through higher prices. For example, a hoodie imported from Bangladesh can cost $7 more, while a microwave from China might jump nearly $30 in price. At a time when the cost of living is already soaring, these increases force consumers to cut back on spending or skip non-essential purchases. This shift hits retail, services, and domestic manufacturing hard. If prices continue rising, consumer spending, the backbone of the economy, could falter, slowing down overall growth. Unemployment sits at a seemingly stable 4.2%, but the numbers tell a more troubling story. Over 685,000 jobs have disappeared in recent months, especially in retail, transportation, and manufacturing sectors, all directly impacted by tariffs and global supply chain breakdowns. Job losses strain workers financially and erode consumer confidence, leading to reduced spending. Without jobs, the economy loses vital momentum. If tariff policies persist without support measures, unemployment could rise further, threatening social welfare and economic stability nationwide. The International Monetary Fund forecasts global economic growth at only 2.8% for 2025, well below earlier expectations. Some experts warn that 2.3% growth or lower signals an impending recession. Rising trade protectionism and supply chain disruptions have created global uncertainty. Key U.S. trading partners, including the European Union, Japan, and India, are steadily reducing dependence on American imports, moving toward a trade decoupling trend. This not only lowers trade volumes, but also shakes confidence in the U.S. as a reliable partner. The global economic future now faces serious questions about sustainability and resilience amid mounting risks. The global slowdown is fueling growing concerns over widespread job losses and shrinking investments worldwide. Without coordinated global action, these challenges could deepen, threatening a prolonged period of economic stagnation.
The U.S. says Trump has secured $600 billion in investment commitments, with agreements to boost defense and technology ties.
President Trump did say that the Saudis had committed to investing $600 billion into the U.S. over the next 4 years. That seems to be the figure that they've agreed to today.
$600 billion. That's the amount Saudi Arabia has pledged to invest in the U.S. But Washington wants more. $1 trillion. And this demand may trigger a geopolitical gamble with no guaranteed winner. What does the U.S. want from Saudi Arabia? In 2025, as the trade war with China pauses, the United States turns its focus to the Middle East with a clear request. Saudi Arabia must invest $1 trillion USD into the American economy. The publicly stated goal: to create jobs, boost growth, and most importantly, maintain global dominance in AI technology. Previously, Saudi Arabia's total investment in the U.S. hovered around $10 billion annually. Now, $600 billion is being discussed, with expectations of reaching a full $1 trillion. Why such urgency? Because the U.S. faces financial shortfalls, soaring debt, and a critical need to outpace China in tech. But Saudi Arabia is still tied to China. Even as the U.S. seeks stronger ties, China remains Saudi Arabia's largest customer. In 2024, China imported 1.6 million barrels of oil per day, making up 80% of total Saudi exports to China. In 2023, that trade yielded Saudi Arabia a $30 billion surplus. A lifeline against their mounting budget deficits, China's doing more than just buying oil. It's building deep strategic roots in the region, and the longer Saudi stays with China, the harder it becomes to align with America. Saudi Arabia's budget is stretched thin. Despite vast oil wealth, Saudi Arabia is quietly in financial distress. Since Q3 of 2022, it has posted consecutive budget deficits, reaching a record $15.7 billion shortfall in Q1 2025. April's oil crash only worsened matters. To stay afloat, the kingdom is issuing more debt, relying on bonds to fund operations. Meanwhile, Saudi is pouring nearly $2 trillion into domestic megaprojects, most notably NEOM, a futuristic desert city costing at least $1.5 trillion. So, where will another $1 trillion come from? The answer may be, it won't. The U.S. is running out of options. U.S. Treasury yields have surged to 4.5%, echoing levels from earlier market panics. If Washington keeps issuing bonds to fund tech ambitions, inflation could spike again, the dollar may drop, and investor confidence could collapse. That's why the U.S. is now dependent on foreign capital, especially from Saudi Arabia. Some in Washington propose creating an American sovereign wealth fund. But here's the catch. The U.S. runs twin deficits, both fiscal and trade. This means any new fund would be built on debt, and that debt brings risk, market distortions, bubbles, bad investments, and a heavier national debt burden. Who's winning the chip war? Despite fiscal hurdles, the U.S. still leads in AI chip technology, and it's using this to influence the Middle East. NVIDIA recently agreed to supply 18,000 Blackwell AI chips for a 500-megawatt data center in Saudi Arabia. The U.S. is also allowing over 1 million NVIDIA chips to be sold to the UAE through 2027, some going to G42 in Abu Dhabi, others supporting U.S. tech operations in the region. Meanwhile, China is investing $140 billion into its chip industry, compared to America's $35 billion. China also enjoys much lower borrowing costs, just 1.9% compared to America's 4.4%. This means Beijing can spend more, faster, and cheaper, especially in semiconductors.
42% of Americans have lost confidence. The Dow Jones is facing its worst April since the Great Depression, and working families are beginning to ask, what has really happened to the world's leading economy? Markets collapse. Citizens lose everything by the end of April. All three major U.S. stock indices plunged. S&P 500 down 2.5%, Nasdaq dropped 2.5%, and Dow Jones fell 2.48%. The shock was so severe that the Wall Street Journal ran the headline, "Worst since the Great Depression." But this isn't just numbers. For millions of Americans, this is their retirement vanishing. Families depending on dividends, 401ks, or short-term investments suddenly had nothing to fall back on. Interest rates are surging. Prices are climbing. A simple lunch now costs more than a full day's minimum wage. Manual workers, delivery drivers, school teachers are watching their savings disappear before they can react. The big question is, who will rescue them from this freefall when economic stabilization policies are still under discussion? Policies miss the people. Trust in politics crumbles. According to a Rasmussen poll, a traditionally right-leaning source, Democrats lead Republicans by 4 percentage points. This isn't just a shift in polling. It signals a deep fracture in political trust. Why? Many voters say they feel recent policies serve only the elite class, failing to address real hardships like unstable employment, unfair taxation, and lack of transparency in public spending. One glaring example, a plan to cut $4.5 trillion in taxes for the ultra-wealthy, while simultaneously proposing to slash $880 billion from Medicaid, the health program for the poor and elderly. People are asking, when hospitals shut down, when medicine becomes unaffordable. Do growth statistics mean anything anymore? Education, immigration, welfare, all under attack. Both Harvard and MIT face the threat of losing $3 billion in federal funding for not complying with policy directives. Letters from the administration demanded control over admissions, firing of faculty with opposing views, and elimination of diversity programs. Simultaneously, over 1 million immigrants were deported, many without proper legal process. Some were removed from the country without ever seeing a courtroom. The result? Millions of children left without parents, communities torn apart, and fear seeping into daily life. And it doesn't stop there. The Department of Education, though officially abolished, still operates to garnish wages from students who haven't paid off their loans. Recent graduates, barely making ends meet, are being financially strangled, while billionaires legally dodge taxes. Is it fair that a student is pursued for debt while the super rich enjoy loopholes? Data erased, trust broken, a cloudy future. When Harvard was sued, when science was censored, when weather, disease, and climate data were erased from federal systems. Americans began to ask, what is being hidden? A measles outbreak, widespread E. coli. Yet critical information is not reaching the public transparently. Meanwhile, the bond market is in turmoil, yields are spiking, and the probability of a U.S. recession in 2025 is forecast at 90%, according to Apollo Group analysis. Americans today are no longer just worried about gas prices or lunch costs. They're afraid that the entire foundation of their society is starting to crack. 71,000 containers stuck at ports. $28.4 billion in Boeing's market capitalization evaporated in just 48 hours. And this is just the beginning of the global shock called the US-China trade war. Ports are gridlocked. Retail is paralyzed. In early April 2025, the US announced a 145% tariff on over $300 billion worth of imports from China. In just 3 days, exports from China to the US dropped by 47%. In Shanghai, Ningbo, and Shenzhen, containers piled up. More than 71,000 containers were stuck. In California, 27 cargo ships waited offshore, with unloading times stretching to 96 hours, matching the record set during COVID. Container shipping costs surged from $1,950 to $6,820, a 250% increase in just 1 year. 10 days. Shipping companies began canceling contracts mid-route, citing unpredictable pricing due to sudden policy changes. Amazon, the e-commerce giant, canceled shipments on their way. Five Below, the discount retail chain, canceled $67 million worth of orders, equivalent to 11% of their Q2 inventory. China's retaliation, precise and quiet. On April 3, 2025, China quietly issued an order to halt all Boeing aircraft deliveries. No announcements, no arguments. In just 48 hours, Boeing lost $28.4 billion in market capitalization. 787 and 787 Dreamliner deliveries expected in Q2 and Q3 were all postponed. According to Bloomberg, this was a precise strike at America's #1 export symbol. Meanwhile, Airbus benefited. Shares rose 11.2% in Frankfurt as China redirected orders. This is no longer just trade. It's an attack on a symbol. And Boeing, as the industrial leader, is the most visible target. U.S. auto industry in crisis. From chip shortages to soaring prices. The consequences spread from consumer goods to the U.S. auto industry. Ford had to halt production of the F-150 Lightning, GM cut battery production by 60%, and Stellantis reduced production due to parts shortages. In the second week of April, 41,000 vehicles remained unfinished, resulting in over $1.6 billion in losses. car prices surged significantly. Stellantis raised hybrid prices by 8%, and Ford increased the Mustang Mach-E price by $1,200. Even used cars saw a 4.1% price increase in just 1 week. The average price of a new car in the US reached $47,770, an increase of $2,600 in April, relocating factories, scarce land, and risks in the shadows. In response, companies began relocating. Tesla moved Model 3 production to Berlin, Toyota reduced chip dependency by 30%, and Stellantis shifted production lines to Mexico. However, these solutions faced barriers. Hong and Cat Lai ports reached 94% capacity. India relies 60% on road transport, and Mexico increased waiting times at the Laredo border crossing to 12.5 hours. Moreover, China tightened exports of rare earths, causing Ford, Lockheed Martin, and Raytheon to experience critical supply shortages. The earliest forecast for alternative sources is late 2026. Meanwhile, China quietly sold U.S. government bonds, reducing its holdings to the lowest level since 2011. The number of container ships has dropped by 47%, and shipping costs from China have surged by 300% in just 10 days, directly impacting production and the distribution of goods. China halts Boeing deliveries, and U.S. ports face congestion. In April 2025, China halted Boeing deliveries, causing Boeing to lose $28.4 billion in just 48 hours. This wasn't only an economic decision, but a strategic move in response to new U.S. tariffs. Boeing, once a symbol of U.S. industry, is now a target in the trade war. This decision has led to the cancellation of several billion-dollar contracts and disrupted Boeing's production plans for the second half of 2025. Simultaneously, U.S. ports are grappling with severe congestion. The number of container ships has plummeted by 47%, and shipping costs from China have skyrocketed by 300% in just 10 days. The delay in contracts from Chinese shipping companies has caused a backlog of goods, especially in industries relying on Chinese components to maintain production. Amazon, one of the most affected companies, had to cancel over $67 million worth of orders. This is a massive shock to the U.S. consumer market, as products can't arrive on time, causing stock prices of many retail companies to plummet. The direct consequence? U.S. companies are facing severe supply chain disruptions, reducing production capacity, causing shortages of essential items, and driving inflation higher. Impact on the automotive industry and structural changes. The U.S. automotive industry cannot escape the crisis. Ford and GM have been forced to halt production of several vehicle models due to a shortage of key components such as microcontrollers and electronic parts. This has halted production lines, preventing the completion of many popular vehicles. This prolonged situation has caused car prices to rise dramatically. For example, the Ford Mustang Mach-E and Stellantis models saw a 6.8% price increase within just 1 week, an unprecedented surge in the automotive industry. In response to the disruption, Tesla has shifted Model 3 production to Berlin to reduce reliance on Chinese imports. Meanwhile, Toyota is adjusting its hybrid models to decrease dependence on semiconductors and parts from China. However, this is not a quick fix. The shift in supply chains has increased both the cost and development time of vehicles, resulting in higher car prices and longer delivery times. Moreover, China has restricted exports of rare materials such as dysprosium and terbium, crucial for the production of batteries and military equipment. This presents a significant challenge for the U.S. automotive and defense industries. Companies like Lockheed Martin and Ford are facing shortages of essential materials, and finding alternative sources from Australia or Canada will take at least until 2026 to be effective. Meanwhile, this shortage not only disrupts production, but also forces companies to compete fiercely for alternative supplies, driving up production costs and creating a large gap in the global supply chain. Production and global competition. While Tesla and other companies try to shift production, Rivian, Ford, and Chevrolet are ramping up competition with new electric vehicle models. However, rising component costs and longer delivery times have caused car prices in the US to soar. Companies are facing reduced profits and a shortage of vehicles due to production disruptions. Issues ranging from supply chains to material shortages are forcing the global automotive industry to adapt quickly. Tesla and its competitors continue to search for partners to replace China. However, this process is far from simple and will take a long time. Can these changes help companies retain market share while minimizing the impact on consumers? The answer remains uncertain, but the emerging challenges are becoming increasingly clear.
Just 48 hours after the tariff hike was announced, Walmart, the largest retailer in the U.S., shut down multiple major distribution centers. Over 100,000 jobs were lost. What exactly is happening? A system built to perfection suddenly breaks. Walmart has long been known as America's logistics optimization machine. With hundreds of distribution centers spread across strategic states, from California to Arkansas, every pallet, every truckload is timed to the minute. Everything ran like clockwork. But a single change from Washington shattered the entire system. When the government officially imposed high tariffs on a wide range of imported goods, from electronic components to consumer products, the entire supply chain was thrown into complete uncertainty. Import costs surged by 15 to 20% within days. The result? Dozens of once profitable centers suddenly turned unprofitable. For Walmart, where profits are calculated down to the penny, that spike was unabsorbable. CEO Doug McMillon had no choice but to make an unprecedented decision: shut down multiple distribution centers across the U.S. Soaring costs, empty shelves, a market in turmoil. Rising costs were one thing, but what truly overwhelmed Walmart was the sheer volatility. Tariff rates changed too quickly. No one knew what next week would bring. All forecasting became meaningless. Walmart's finance team had to build emergency models, running through dozens of scenarios. The result, under current conditions, continuing operations would mean losing tens of millions of dollars in just one quarter. Especially in the Midwest, where goods are shipped inland from Pacific ports, domestic transport costs jumped by double digits. And the impact extended far beyond the balance sheet. Store shelves started emptying. Online orders were delayed due to halted fulfillment centers. Customers were confused, unable to purchase items they had come to rely on. And something unprecedented happened. Walmart lost control of its own supply chain. Chain reaction, satellite businesses, and communities collapse. Each Walmart distribution center isn't just a warehouse, it's a job hub for the entire region. When one site shuts down, thousands lose employment. Drivers, warehouse staff, repair workers, food service teams, packaging suppliers, all swept into the chaos. Across the country, more than 100,000 people were directly affected within just a few weeks. Towns that depended on Walmart slipped into crisis. Local revenues fell sharply. Small vendors who had exclusive deals with Walmart saw contracts frozen and faced the threat of bankruptcy. Even businesses that had just expanded their operations to serve Walmart were now forced to lay off staff or shut down machinery. This was no longer a business decision. It had become a widespread social crisis. An unexpected response: AI and localization of supply chains. But Walmart didn't sit still. Right after announcing the closures, multiple task forces were mobilized at headquarters. They began redesigning the entire supply chain with 3 core strategies. First, investing in AI. Walmart's engineers worked with machine learning experts to develop real-time monitoring systems for trade policies, from government statements to port disruptions and freight fee trends. Second, expanding domestic sourcing. Walmart proactively signed deals with U.S. manufacturers, especially in the Midwest and Southeast, to replace imported goods. Third, building a new distribution network. Instead of relying solely on mega hubs, they tested micro-fulfillment models, small flexible warehouses that can reroute goods quickly without depending on ocean freight. This marked the strongest transformation in Walmart's 60-year history. Just one policy move can force a commercial empire to stop and reevaluate everything. But more importantly, Walmart's response, restructuring, localizing, deploying AI, working with government and workers, proves one thing. In the storm, there is still a path for those willing to change.